So most advice about talking to people completely misses the point. They'll tell you to memorize openers. Then they may tell you to fake confidence, fake it before you make it. And then they'll tell you just to stop caring what people think, just stop caring. Don't give a fuck, bro. Just stop caring. But none of that explains something which confused me for many years. Why could I go out some days and just talk to lots of people without thinking at all? Yet on other days, I couldn't even make eye contact. Why did talking feel completely effortless in one situation and completely impossible? If conversation was a skill, why did it disappear almost overnight? So the answer surprised me, because the problem was never conversation. It was everything that was happening internally before the conversation. Here's what most guys miss. Long before you decide to go and speak to a woman you want to speak to, or speak to people that you don't know, your brain has already decided what that conversation means, what it means about you, what it means about your worth and your value. It isn't just saying hello. It isn't just having a conversation. It quietly becomes something much bigger. Maybe it's your big chance to finally prove you're now confident. It's your big chance to now finally prove that you've overcome all of that anxiety. Maybe it's proof that you're finally becoming that person that you've always wanted to be. And now, because that simple conversation is carrying all of that meaning, your nervous system will now treat that conversation completely differently. Why? Because it's no longer protecting you from a conversation anymore. It's protecting your identity. That's why you start hesitating, waiting for the perfect moment. Wait until you feel calmer. Wait until you feel less anxious. Waiting until you become that confident version of yourself. But the problem, or the strange thing is, really, the more you wait, the heavier that simply just going up and saying hello becomes. The heavier that approach becomes. The heavier striking up a conversation with a stranger or a woman that you want to speak to becomes. And now, because that's so heavy, you're no longer actually taking action. You're in your head, rehearsing, overanalyzing, overthinking, self-attacking, negotiating with yourself, trying to feel ready. And that is actually exhausting. And I know this because, I spent years doing that. I'd go out with the intention to speak to some people, overcome my fear, become more confident, and I just walk around. I would see somebody I want to speak to, normally a woman I'd want to speak to. I'd feel the pressure, then I'd hesitate, then I'd go into my head and I'd tell myself, not now. I need to wait. Maybe the next person, maybe the next woman. And then, sometimes I'd actually finally force myself to approach, and sometimes it would go well or I would get rejected. But that wasn't the actual problem. The problem came after. If the conversation went badly, I'd then replay in my mind every second. If it went well, I wouldn't really be enjoying the fact that it went well. I'd be feeling the pressure. Can I do that again? What made it go well? And then if I didn't approach at all, which happened a lot, where I just end up just strolling around, I'd go home self-attacking, thinking, I'm wasting my time. I'm never going to get better at this. This is a waste of time for somebody like me. And that just made things even worse. So every day became this measurement of self-improvement. Am I getting better? Am I finally becoming enough? And here's the big realization, looking back now, actually, as I think about it, I wasn't trying to just have conversations. I was trying to escape myself. And that's a huge difference. Because, once every interaction becomes connected to your self-worth, that pressure is just too much to handle. And then hesitation would actually make perfect sense. People call it fear, but when really it's just protection. Protection from shame, protection from disappointment, protection from confirming this story you've been secretly carrying all of these years. And then when you avoid taking action and actually speaking to somebody, you feel a sense of relief. Just for a moment, you relax, your body relaxes, which then you learn something dangerous. Avoidance works. You feel relief if you avoid, if you start checking your phone, if you just go for one more coffee, if you walk around one more lap of the nightclub. Avoidance works not because it solves the problem, but because it removes the feeling or it distracts you from the feeling. And that's why this cycle becomes so hard to escape. And that's why working harder rarely works. In fact, trying harder and trying to push through and pushing yourself is making this a lot worse, because now you're adding even more pressure. You're adding even more expectations. You're adding more reasons why failure is just something you have to avoid. And this is the trap that I think a lot of guys get stuck in. They think the answer is more discipline, more exposure, just do more approaches, when actually that's making things harder and actually making them quit harder. I got lucky because I came across a new perspective on anxiety, which changed everything. It made things so much lighter and easier, and I was able to just go out and speak to whoever I wanted. It felt like all of that pressure in an instant had gone. I felt free, I felt light, I felt expressive. I went out and I just started to speak to everybody, and it felt so liberating. And it wasn't another confidence technique. It wasn't another dating strategy. It wasn't another way of forcing myself into uncomfortable situations to progressively desensitize. It was something I'd never seen before. It was understanding that my real struggle wasn't anxiety. My real struggle was my relationship to anxiety. So the big thing that changed everything for me was I realized I was trying to get rid of whatever I was feeling. Every day I was trying to fix myself, trying to feel different. I was secretly trying to become somebody who no longer felt anxiety. And so what was I doing without realizing it? Every day I was fighting myself. Every day I was secretly rejecting myself. And like I said, everything changed when I stopped that fight, when I gave up the fight. Give up the fight, and that's where the gold is. That's where the expression is. That's where you can just go out and speak to whoever you want, because you're no longer holding all of these obligations and all of these structures and this pressure on yourself. It gives you complete freedom. The shackles are off, and you can make mistakes, and you can talk to whoever you want from this place, because you're no longer protecting yourself. And you're no longer judging yourself. You're free to be who you are. This was because I stopped treating fear like it was an enemy. Instead of constantly trying to be somebody else, I started to allow myself to be exactly where I was, because that's who I am. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I was awkward or uncertain. Something incredible happened after that, almost spooky. It was like I let go. Like I said earlier, it was almost like a backpack I didn't realize I was carrying had been dropped. I felt light, I felt loose, and expression became easy. The pressure I'd been carrying for years started dissolving. Conversations felt lighter. I was no longer trying to impress anybody. I was no longer trying to prove to myself or anybody else that I was confident. I was no longer secretly asking women to tell me if I was enough or not. I was simply present. I was simply where I was. I was no longer resisting. Ironically, that's when everything became easy. And this wasn't because I'd suddenly become fearless. There was still fear and there was still resistance, but I'd made peace with the fear and the resistance, because underneath that, there was nothing left to protect. When you have this realization, you realize you were never broken in the first place. If you want to learn the step-by-step process that I took to become free, to actually be able to go out and speak to whoever you want with ease, without putting pressure on yourself, go to the link below. Plenty of information in there. I work with everyone in that group personally. And if you enjoyed this video, like, comment below and subscribe. See you in the next video.